I am also very conscious of it. It's not going to be perfect. It's not going to be a perfect house. And as long as it's ticking most of all the boxes that are priority for us, then, well, there are some boxes that won't be ticked, and we will have to be okay with that. And that's a box that's not ticked, and it's fine. Like, it's, yeah, no one's going to die.
Well, Tatiana, it is so awesome to have you back. I'm so looking forward to catching up with you, seeing where you're at in your project, and sharing more of your incredible new build journey with the Undercover Architect audience. I'm wondering, to begin, I remember when we last spoke, you were in conversation with your builder, you were kicking off the pack process, and you were starting to think about how the design could work for your site. How have things been progressing since then? Where are you actually up to now in your project overall?
Yep. So we continued with the builder and the building designer that we had engaged back then, and it's working really well. So we went through, we are probably in a transition stage between the end of concept design and the beginning of preliminary plans. And so most of that conversation has been happening with the building designer, and there's been input from the builder, but it really has been more along the lines of, all right, stick to simple shapes, straight walls, like just the very broad constraints to try and manage the budget. And that's what where we're at the moment. So we're feeling fairly comfortable with the plans where they are at the moment. It's only probably one section where we have all the wet areas, all the bathrooms, toilets, laundry in one strip on one end of the house. There's something that's often we haven't been able to put the finger on it. And so we're kind of just pushing through in that space to kind of get to a point where we feel like, that's what it is. But yeah, we're feeling like really close to getting to preliminary plans, and just had a chat with the builder on earlier this week, and he came and we had a 2-hour chat about what preliminary plans look like, what does that process include, and what it all means, because obviously we're new to that. And so he was very helpful, and I'm actually pumped. I'm pretty excited about all that. Yes. So, yeah.
That's so awesome. That's so exciting to hear. So I want you to be excited, because it's important that you enjoy this. It doesn't mean it won't be without its challenges and its, sort of hiccups and hurdles along the way. But it's a beautiful and big opportunity to obviously create a fantastic home for you and your family. And when you're investing so much effort and energy in doing a really good job of it and being really intentional about it, it's lovely to feel excited and enjoy the process along the way. So can you talk through a little bit about the design? I know, we spoke about it last time on the podcast. You have a tight budget. You've got a site that does have obviously room to play with in terms of the shape and the size of the design. However, you've got a really good understanding that the simpler that you keep it, the more pavilion sort of, form, and keeping that design very, I suppose, not articulating the form and going over the top with it, but just keeping it very simple to construct, very simple in its layout, will help you manage your budget, and then you can still obviously get it to work functionally and orientation wise and all of those kinds of things for the site. So I know from experience myself on my own projects and also working with clients, when you do have room to move, you've really got to be super disciplined with yourself that the design just doesn't keep sort of ballooning, that you don't keep just, you're sort of massaging and adding space without, because next thing you know, you've all of a sudden added another 50 square meters to the building, and you're then just sort of, really struggling with your budget. So how has the design been progressing, and where are you at with the size and the layout and what you're managing to get into the overall home?
Yeah. So something that's been super helpful from the beginning is actually having a tight budget on its own has been great in the context of the builder was able to tell me from the get-go, don't go over, we're looking at 200 square meters, and if we're very generous, we might get to 210. So that from the get-go kind of just constrained all of our thinking in that space, and we haven't had room to go, oh, but maybe we can add here and there, and then can we? And there is a bit of potential when we get looking into finances properly, which is a bit of an overwhelming space for me. But when we dive into that space, there might be room, just looking at how like the housing market is doing here in town, that we might be able to stretch, like go bigger, like budget wise. We might be able to source a bit more financing. And so in that space, the conversation with the builder and the building designer has been, because the shape of the build is relatively simple, if we do want to add space, it would be almost a matter of moving one wall, and that would add space to so many other areas in the house. And so it's not complicated. Even that's not complicated if we get to the point where we find out that we can expand a little bit. But the build at the moment is sitting at 205 square meters. There is probably an item that is still contentious with the building designer, and there is argument to not have it there, which is a third toilet. I grew up with that. I'm from Latin America, and we live densely, and so every house has so many toilets, but particularly there's usually like a social toilet where, when you're having people, that's the toilet that's used for social gatherings, and no one has to go into the private spaces of the house, which we love the idea of, but we do know that it is a bit like a luxury item, and it is right beside what would be the toilet for the bathroom of the boys' rooms. And so it does feel a bit over the top. But if we can make it happen, we would love to make it happen, because we do know the difference that it makes. We do have a lot of people staying weekends with us, families with kids. And so just having been able to offer one bathroom for the family, and that they don't have to be worried about all the people coming into that space when we have visitors while hosting. That's probably the one luxury item that we're kind of hoping we can keep in the building. But yes, I think so far I'm feeling really comfortable with how the building is sitting. The distances between private areas and social areas, and I was just even last night just thinking about how the current house, the noises, and my boys wake up and we can all hear it from our room, like my husband and I, whereas in this other layout, I'm already getting excited about the kitchen is on the other end of all the bedrooms, and so whoever wakes up and goes and does something in the kitchen, it's like people will hear about it, but in the distance, like, it's not going to be clangs and pots and things right in your ear. Just little things like that. That is like, it's not a big house, but it's just, and this is not a big house either, but it's just the fact that the spaces are laid out in a way that just, they do look like they would work so much better. So yeah,
fantastic.
That's probably where we're at.
And so can you just run through the rooms that you're including in the future home?
Yes, so we've got 4 bedrooms, 3 bathrooms, so an ensuite with a walk-in robe, a second bathroom, and the one powder room, which is toilet and potentially a basin in the toilet. A laundry that's right beside, like almost like a mud room area, where it's the main entry for the family from the garage, and then a media room. We call it media, but it's a bit of like a multitasking sort of room, that's office and playroom for kids, and it's got bit like something that we wanted to move from this current house that it was one of the renovations we did, was to create that room with some noise isolation by using glass doors, sliding doors. And it works great. So we thought we don't want to lose that, because our boys all play instruments, and they play loud instruments. They're all brass and wood. So that works really well. And living room, dining room, kitchen, al fresco. And that's really it. And that's almost like, I think I described it almost on the way that it flows itself. So private areas, and then you've got the laundry. That's probably the one area that's a bit, if I had more space to move with the budget, I probably would have tried something different. But in saying that, it's not that it doesn't work, it's just that it's not, because usually laundries are either close to kitchens or close to bathrooms, and ours is neither. It's like in between the two of those things. But that's okay. It'll be fine. It doesn't necessarily bother me too much. And then living, dining, kitchen, and it flows on out to the al fresco, which is something that I love as well. The kitchen is almost got a continuation from the main working bench, then sliding door, and then out to the barbecue straight off on that same wall, which really, like, I love that thought. I love the thought of that, just all connected space there.
Yeah. And you've got a carport, a freestanding carport. So the way that the plan's working, and I can see that kind of concept of the laundry / mudroom as sort of the it's probably performing like an internal entry from a garage would. It's just that the garage is a freestanding building that's separate to the house. So it'll give you that secondary entry into the home. And the home doesn't really have a traditional front door, does it? You're obviously going to think then about your landscaping and how you arrive at the house as a visitor to then walk into those primary living spaces. So have you had sort of conversations about that from a design point of view, about what that's going to involve?
Yeah, so that was an interesting conversation because I was almost dead against having two entry doors, in that I have seen so many places where there's a main entry that's placed almost for the sake of the view, the how the house presents, but it tends to be dead space because the cars tend to be parking elsewhere, and so people walk into the house from wherever they park. And I just said to them, we have a tight budget. I don't want to be spending the money on an area that's going to be barely ever used. I'd rather use it somewhere else. So initially there was going to be just the one door from the garage, and everybody was going to just drive almost to the back of the house and drive and walk in the house through that back corner. And I really appreciated the building designer, because he just went with it for a while. He went with it, he tried it, he placed it there, and we were talking about, the kitchen layout, and there was a space there that, we were just kind of trying to make it work, and every time we moved walls, something was a bit off, until he just said to me, you know what, it just pains me. That door there just pains me. And I understand where you're going to with that, but it just pains me that it is there. And I don't see people, just the fact that people are having kind of to walk through cars and stuff to get in the house, and it's right at the back. He didn't ask it quite like this, but it was almost like, can you give me a bit of room to throw you a bit of a curveball? I'm like, all right, yep, go your hardest, have a go and see what happens. And he did come back with essentially he is an L shape, and essentially he kind of switched the things that were how the things were sitting on that L shape, which gave us then a main entrance. But it's a main entrance that doesn't occupy valuable space. It's just a door where visitors walk in from a visitor's parking spot at the front of the house on the north side. And I loved it because I thought, oh, yeah, well, that's, they probably, I don't appreciate walking into places and looking straight into kitchens, which that's going to happen in our house. But at the same time, I am also very conscious of it. It's not going to be perfect. It's not going to be a perfect house. And as long as it's ticking most of all the boxes that are priority for us, then, well, there are some boxes that won't be ticked, and we will have to be okay with that. And that's a box that's not ticked, and it's fine. Like, no one's going to die. It'll be fine.
It's an interesting one. I know that I think that when you have sites like yours, which is a larger site, your house is going to be set further back from the street. You don't have a lot of street frontage because of the shape of the block. So the arrival process is quite different to a suburban street where you walk up and you need to see the front door so that you're not meandering aimlessly around somebody's front yard, or, you've got that ability to surveil who's coming. I think that there's always an opportunity when you've got an unusual block like yours, right through to obviously having a very large acreage block, where as long as I think what's good is you've got the floor plan set up so that you've still got good supervision. If you're hanging out in that kitchen, living, dining area, you're going to see exactly who's arriving at the home. And so what I found is the way that life then works for people who live in homes like this is that when they don't recognize the car or they see the stranger walking up the driveway, they actually walk out and meet them outside rather than waiting for them to get to the house, And if it's a friend or somebody that you're expecting to come over, then the arrival process is that they actually come to the threshold that you've created.
Yeah.
And so it's a different experience. Whereas when you live on a suburban street where the front of your house is essentially it's much more about security and sort of a wall to the street because you're closer to, to the street, or, that the person who parks is literally only going to have a few meters to walk before they're at the front door. That front door needs to be much more like the front door is the threshold of where somebody gets greeted. And so there needs to be kind of that space of, this is how I shelter this stranger from viewing right into my home. It's a different kind of experience of how people arrive at the building. So I think it's and I love that the designer was, that to me shows a really interesting collaboration between you, where you've had a really clear brief about what you were seeking to achieve, and you've also recognized, and the designers felt that they've had permission to push back on a couple of things. And there's been a trust where you've been willing to entertain, okay, yeah, let's have a look and see what else, So to me, that speaks to a really great collaboration where they understand what your main goals are. They can see that there might be another alternative. And when you work with when you work with designers in that way, oftentimes as a client, you can't necessarily visualize what they might come up with. But if you can give them that experience, that opportunity to show you, then oftentimes it can deliver, quite an exciting outcome. So I love that that's been sort of your experience of navigating that overall.
Yeah, and it's been very much a learning for me to actually let him do his job. Like, that's what he does. And I'm not the building designer. So very early in the process, I was doing a lot of drawings myself, which is fine because it was helping me to process the ideas as well. But it was just taking too much bandwidth, I guess. It's like, well, I can draw, but I don't have to come up with the right drawing myself. That's what he's there for. And so, yeah, just a process of just relaxing and letting him come up with different things and bounce off each other a bit that way. And very conscious of that. I've plenty of times I've said to him, like, you are the one that knows about this stuff. So, I have my ideas and I think I am set on many of them, but at the same time, don't let me drown on my ideas if you don't think that they're okay. Don't. I do want to be stretched and I do want to be hearing all the things because I know that I haven't considered everything. Like, this is not what I do for a living. So I know that you would have more things to, bring forth and help me to consider that I probably wouldn't have come up with myself. So yeah, it's been awesome.
I love it. I love it. So with that budget conversation, so you mentioned that it's actually been helpful having that constraint very early on of the builder saying, look, this is the kind of square meterage amount that you can look at building. That's what we know we could potentially deliver for the budget that you have. You've also obviously got some potential flex there when you do go to finance, and we can have a bit more of a chat about what your next steps with that might be so that you can start sort of making some decisions about that. I think it's really interesting, that observation that having the tight budget has actually been helpful. I know that lots of people find constraints frustrating, but constraints can actually be incredible sources of creativity, and they can also be really great eliminators of options. So that can really help you then kind of make decisions much faster and clearer. And so that can be super helpful. So the builder's kind of given you that early process. You've met with them to sort of chat about preliminary drawings. How are they going with looking at the design and also with the building form overall? I know you had some questions about the roof form and sort of pricing up different options with the roof form. Do you want to chat about that and how sort of you're navigating some of those budget decisions now that you feel like the concept plan is sort of starting to be where it needs to be?
Yeah, it is very early on still. So we, in our conversation with the builder, which was still very general, we haven't really, I guess, delved into the nitty-gritty of it. But we did, I guess, agree that, next step is once we get some preliminary plans, he can go on and quote. And so then he can, I asked the question, is it possible that you give me like, this is your kitchen budget, this is your bathrooms budget, this is your laundry budget, so that I know I cannot spend any more than this or that on these things. And, potentially even this is probably, we won't be looking at spending more than X amount of money on your roofs. In saying that, we are looking at, so the conversation with the roofs were mostly about do we build the roof up until a certain point where the wall meets the alfresco area, and we change the roof in that spot. My concern, or the trigger for that consideration, was being able to control light coming into the house because that's the eastern side of the house. So being able to shut light coming in summer and allow it in winter. But the problem with that is that some of the solutions we're looking at, one of them, the one that I was probably more keen on, probably won't allow for fans to be installed, which we cannot go without fans where we live, for an alfresco area. And then the other one, which is actually from an option you have mentioned, I don't know, somewhere in the thousands of resources that you share, there's the polycarbonate roof with like
with battens slabs underneath. Yeah.
Yes. But we just both kind of thought it looks awesome, but it's just going to be so hot for us here.
For your climate, for sure.
Yeah. So we kind of not going with that. So we essentially have, if we manage to find it's like a pergola type roofing that I was looking at. And if we manage to find something that allows for fan installation, we might consider it. But other than that, I think we're just looking at just extending the whole roof all the way out. And he said, to be honest, he wasn't worried about light coming in. He thinks that the space is well lit, and maybe if we reduce some eaves on the northeast side of the house and add it to the western side or something. But he wasn't worried about light coming in, so which was reassuring. But yeah, it is still very early on in that conversation.
Yeah. If we just have a bit of a talk about kind of some of the decision making about that, is the building designer documenting, like, are they doing this concept design in a 3D tool like SketchUp or Revit, or ArchiCAD or anything like that, or has everything been two-dimensional for you?
Most of it has been two-dimensional. Whenever I have specifically asked for a 3D of a specific area, I have got that. But it hasn't been many. I think I've only asked for that like twice or three times for just specific areas that I was not really seeing the flow of things for the kitchen and the laundry. Yep. I think it was. But in a general sense, we're working on 2D. So
yeah.
yes.
Okay. So, I mean, a lot of building designers and architects, even though they're drawing and presenting 2D information, if they're using a 3D tool, they'll be thinking about the three-dimensionality of the space and the form whilst they're designing it, because it's very difficult just to slap a roof on a 2D floor plan if you haven't thought about it, particularly if it's a hip and gable roof. So hip and gable roofs are really driven by the geometry of the floor plan. So, so with any, my hope is that the building designer has been doing that already. And yes. So there's a couple of things that you could do to sort of experiment and understand this. So one is obviously, like you're saying, making the decision about whether you roof the outdoor area as part of the main roof of the house or whether you handle it with a roofed pergola of some sort and it be a separate structure. So I think that would be a valuable conversation to get the builder and the building designer and yourself around a table to sort of nut out, and the builder to sort of really be chatting with the building designer about, okay, if we went with it just being roofed as part of the house, and we used one roof to kind of cover the alfresco area as well, what's that going to mean for our structure? What's that going to mean for cost? Is that going to, work overall? Now, the thing that do you know what ceiling heights you're going to be doing internally? Have you had that discussion?
I think we were looking at 2,400.
Okay. So yeah, at 2,400, it is tricky to include fans. It's doable, but they do get quite low. If the budget can afford it, going to 2,550 can be just a little bit more height. You can still do all of your glazing at 2,100 high, but that 2,550 is the next kind of standard plasterboard height, and your internal linings will come in 1,200 and 1,350 wide, so you can get 2 sheets of plasterboard on a 2,550 high ceiling. And it just gives you a little bit more space and volume to be able to get ceiling fans in a little bit more easily, so that you don't have to watch yourself when you take a jumper off and those kinds of things inside the house. So, or worry about boys jumping on beds and clocking themselves in the ceiling fan. Yeah. So that might be worth sort of having the conversation about. Okay, let's have a chat about what's that going to do to the budget. You will find at 2,552, it will do a lot to assist with the sense of spaciousness through what's going to be quite long pavilion style forms. So just getting that little bit of extra height will help it feel not quite so horizontal. So I think that would be definitely worth sort of having a chat about. You could look at the most economical way to build a roof is going to be, in terms of the roof on the house itself, is going to be a trussed roof. So if it's a hip and gable roof, then it's a straight triangular roof with a flat bottom chord on the truss that then the ceiling gets fixed to. Same thing if it's a skillion roof, then the truss will be more of a triangle, but it'll still have a flat bottom with a flat ceiling. Every time I've done the exercise on a project, and I've seen others do the exercise on a project, and we've chatted about this inside home method, is a hip and gable roof tends to be more economical than a skillion roof, because you have similar materials in the roof itself, the structure of the roof itself, but a skillion roof will, of course, mean that one wall is low, finishes to the underside of the low part of the roof, and one wall finishes to the high side of the roof. And you also then have a high side of the roof that you have to reach and finish, which can sometimes then bring in extra requirements for scaffolding and those kinds of things to work off. So whereas a hip and gable roof, or just a hip roof, will be the same height walls on both sides. If it's a gable roof, it'll obviously have the triangular sort of A shape on the end walls where you'll get that extra bit of cladding above. But if you do a gable, then you'll just have the same wall height the whole way around. So it's definitely seen as more economical. One of the things that you could consider for the pergola itself is you can obviously build very simple pergola structures just with posts and beams. And then you could look at like a self-supporting roofing structure like a Bondor solar span, which is that it's an insulated panel where it's got ColourBond flat white, powder coated metal on the underside of it. And then it's got a roofing profile on the top of it. So you can do it at a low pitch, and you could have a trim deck type profile on the top, so it can still sit at like 2 degrees or something like that in terms of its pitch. And because it's insulated, it can do a really good job of then providing you with some insulation and shade to those outdoor areas. They come in panels, and so where the panels join, there's sort of a tongue and groove section with a plastic strip on them that where they join. You can run cabling through there. So the layout can work that you can then run any power for a ceiling fan at the joins and be able to fix the ceiling fan in those locations. And then you can look at, rather than putting lighting on the soffit or the ceiling of the pergola itself, you can look at attaching wall lights to the house and just uplighting the underside of the roof. And one of the things that I find is super effective with those kinds of sort of pergola structures is they're very easy and quick to put up. You'll find whenever a builder does an exercise on it, I find they say, well, the Bondor's more expensive than us just doing roofing material. But once you add insulation and ceiling lining, then the Bondor generally comes out on par price-wise, and it goes up very, very quickly. So it comes in varying thicknesses. It can be supported. It only needs to be supported at either end. So it can generally run from the house out to a beam that runs along the outside edge of your deck or your alfresco area, and it can span that quite easily with the different thicknesses that it has. And so something like that, you could then do a very low pitch. And then you could get the building designer just to confirm if they're doing it in 3D, they can model it up for you and then geolocate it so that they can then show you what's the sun doing on the summer solstice, on the winter solstice, and particularly sort of seeing on that eastern side. The main thing you'll find obviously on the eastern side is the sun's going to be more horizontal. So you might find that you just need to add a vertical blind of some sort. And that might not be something that you necessarily do straight off the bat, but you just know that down the track you want to add that, and you make sure that you've got a piece of structure you're going to be able to fix that vertical blind to be able to drop that down and provide some extra shade. Or it could be that you can add some landscaping sort of beyond the house to be able to provide you with some of that shade as well. But I think that sort of trying to get the builder and the building designer around the table to explore those different options would be helpful for you to understand, particularly with the geometry of the L. If you do a gable roof, the simplest geometry with an L is that the two sides of the L are the same width, because then the ridge line of the gable can run continuously. If one of the sides of the L is fatter than the other, then that ridge line of the gable's not going to meet. So you just have to look at what happens in the corner where the junction of the L as to how one gable roof's going to meet the other. And so the building designer can sort of look through with the builder, okay, do we then just we'll have one main gable roof over, say, the kitchen, living and dining. And then what you could actually look at doing, Tatiana, is the builder might go, okay, well, we'll make the kitchen, living, dining pavilion a 2550 ceiling, and we can mount the trusses on 2550 high walls. And we're going to have to run that gable roof the whole way through. So we can then the L, which if the bedrooms and bathroom pavilion is narrower than the living, then that means that hip and gable roof will have a different ridge line. You could actually drop those ceilings in the bedrooms and the bathrooms down to 2400, and so the roof structure of it is at a slightly different position than the roof structure of the kitchen, living, dining pavilion, and that's how you could potentially get them joining at the junction. So and bedrooms and bathrooms can very happily accommodate 2,400 high ceilings, but then you could be spending the money on getting the 2,550 high ceilings in the kitchen, living, dining area. So, you know, I think getting the building designer and the builder and yourself around the table to start massaging your concept design. If it's almost there and you're not going to be making any holistic changes, you know, you're just massaging wall positions potentially, looking at room sizes, whether you can kind of get a little bit of, you know, space here or adjust there. If you're happy with the L form and you're roughly happy with kind of the width and the shape and the size of things, then you're at the point where discussing the roof, it would be a really valuable conversation, because it's going to impact, obviously, the aesthetic appearance of the home for you. It's going to have a big impact on the cost, and understanding how to do that super simply, whilst also there might be some opportunity for you to, if you are doing a hip and gable roof, you might find that it still then feeds back into you. If we massage the floor plan a little bit here, that could make the roof simpler to construct. So you're not so wedded to the floor plan at the moment that there's not a bit of scope for you to do that as well. Does that all make sense?
Yes. Yeah. It does. It's a lot.
I know. Luckily, we're recording this.
Yes.
But yeah, it's one of those. It's the funniest thing. Hip and gable roofs, we see them everywhere, you know, and they're always the thing that go on. You know, you and I have had a conversation about, if you look at how volume builders or project home builders build their homes, if you want to do things on a budget, then that's kind of like, look at the forms of those homes, because that's what really does, you know, most of our industry is geared up to do. But what is unfortunately the case is that not a lot of building designers or architects even necessarily understand how much the plan drives the geometry of the hip and gable roof form. And computer modeling tools allow you basically just to draw an outline and then go spacebar, click, and dump the geometry on the roof without thinking about it. And I remember being mentored by a particular senior designer who literally showed me, look, no, you have to do it like this. And if you want this to be clean, then you're going to have to massage that width. And it's amazing when you think about it from the floor plan form, how much simpler and cleaner the roof structure can be, and therefore then how much more economical it can be to build. And, you know, it's one of these things, like, you guys get torrential rains. You want to make sure that roof's going to shed water easily. You don't want to have lots of junctions and fiddly flashing and valleys and those kinds of things. You want that roof form to be able to be super protective, super simple, so that it can manage those downpours and get water away from the roof as quickly as possible, and into, obviously, you know, your rainwater collection and those kinds of things. So yeah, I think it's at a good point to have those conversations.
Excellent. Thank you.
I love that he's been clear right from the outset, though, in terms of managing your expectations around that.
Yeah. I appreciate that too, because again, it just limits my options. So I'm not running crazy, just trying to grab here and a bit from everywhere. It's just, well, that's not an option anymore. So, okay, awesome. What is within my range of options? And we'll work with that. So. Yeah.